welcome to Wilder Outdoor Academy. In today's lesson, I'll show you how to make a fun and easy to make camping lantern. And this could also be turned into a survival lantern with just a few minor modifications. But for today's lesson, you'll need a few things. The first thing you'll need is some oil. Doesn't matter the kind. This is canola oil. It's just the cheapest thing I could buy. You will need something to punch a hole through metal. I have a spike here and a hammer. If you don't have a spike, you could use a screwdriver, or if you'd like to do it a faster way and you have a responsible adult around, you could use a drill. You'll want a piece of wood for hammering a hole through the metal onto, so we don't damage a table or anything like that. We'll also want a mason jar. The size doesn't matter, but the mason jar is going to hold the oil for our lantern. If you were in sort of a survival situation and you happen to have oil and the other materials, or some of the other materials here, you could just use a soda can or any kind of container that can hold oil and that can sort of hug or squeeze to the bottom of a wick, if that were the candle. So a soda bottle or a soda can will work, or you could sort of fashion something with just a regular can that you might hold food in. But for today's lesson, because it's a little more fun, something we can do to prepare for a camping trip, I'm going to use a mason jar. We'll need some matches for lighting our lantern. We will need an old shirt. It doesn't need to be a shirt, but it needs to be some kind of clothing that's all cotton. And this is how we're going to make our wick. If you use, I should say, it needs to be all cotton. And the reason it needs to be all cotton is because if there's something else in there like polyester, you're going to be burning chemicals. Polyester is basically a kind of plastic. So some sort of all cotton fabric. And what you'll do with it, see I've gotten a little bit ahead of myself, is you'll cut 3 strands. As long as you'd like, the longer the better. It'll make for a longer wick. And what you can see is I've cut my 3 strands and then tied a knot around the end so that they are secure here. The last thing, and this is optional, but it will help, it's just a tiny piece of wire. It can be a paper clip. This is a tiny piece of, I believe this is 19 or 18 gauge wire. I use it for snaring animals, but something tiny, and we'll potentially use that if you want to secure the wick and move it around. So with that, let's get started. So the first step to making our lantern is to make the wick. And a wick is just a piece of cloth or fabric, some sort of material that will, through what's called capillary suction, just means that spaces in the fabric will suck the material we have in our lantern up. Right? And so since we have oil in our lantern, our wick will eventually suck that oil up into the wick, and when we burn it, it will burn much slower because it's saturated with oil, and as it burns, it will start to suck some of that oil up into it, making the lantern burn for longer. Now, like I said, I have an all cotton t-shirt. I cut 3 strips out of it. This is very thin material. The thicker material you have, the better, because it will not burn as quickly. The more oxygen that can get through here, the faster it will burn. But for today's lesson, I chose a thin t-shirt. I tied a knot at the end so that I have 3 strands that are all connected. And all I'm going to do to make this wick is braid it very, very tightly. Now, if you don't know how to braid, I will admit I'm not the best person to teach it, but I'm going to teach you here just a quick overview. If this is not sufficient for you, go online. I'm sure there are lots and lots of videos on how to do a standard braid, but the idea is you have 3 strands, and you take the outer strand, start on either side, one of the outer strands, and you cross it over the middle strand. Now, that strand is the new middle strand. And I'll take the other side and I'll do the same thing, cross the middle strand. Now, what was the middle strand is the outer strand on the other side. And I just keep doing that and alternating sides. Real tight, keeping it real tight, but moving the outer strand into the middle and switching sides each time I do it. Once I do that, I will have a pretty tight braid. So as you can see, I've finished my braid. It's very tight. I just cut off the end. If it had some loose ends, I cut any extra off. Ideally, you'd want your braid to be a little longer, but this will work for now. The next thing I'm going to do is take my mason jar. I'm going to take out the middle section here of the cap. I'm going to turn it upside down. The reason I want to hammer down from the inside is because I want the metal that's bent to be going up so that I can pull the wick out without it getting caught. So if I hammer through this side, the metal will be pointed up and the wick can move out smoothly. So turn it upside down, take my hammer, my nail, I'm just going to hammer it straight through. My hole is not as big as I'd want at the beginning. I can kind of shimmy it down on that nail a little bit. And here, I have my top. Now, once I have my wick, and I have the top of my lantern, the hole punched through, I'm going to take some oil, put it in the jar. Doesn't need to be super full, but it does need enough to fill the wick, or go all the way up the wick. Now that my jar is full, I'm going to slide the wick through the hole in my lid. I'm going to set it in the oil. I'm going to tighten my lid. Now, I want to get as much of it in the oil as I can, because eventually, if I leave this long enough, this oil is going to suck all the way up to the top. For time's sake, I'm going to kind of roll it around in here so you can see. You can see me light it, but that is it. That is our camping lantern. Again, you could use a survival lantern if you wanted to put it in a soda can, or if you were in an emergency situation. You don't need canola oil. If you're really savvy, you could distill birch oil or cover this in pine tree sap. It would do the same thing. But again, a fun project to prepare for when we go camping. I forgot something. The last step after I'm ready to light it is I want to take this little piece of metal and stick it just an inch or so towards the bottom of the wick, through the wick. And the reason I want to do this is because when that wick starts to burn, it's going to burn down. And I want to be able to pick the wick up and move it up as I go. So what I will do, in fact, I'll move it a little further down, is I'll let it burn. And once it burns and it starts to get to the point where I think, oh man, I probably need to get a little bit more wick, I can blow it out, pick up my metal, and shove it back in. So that's that. It's ready to light. Generally, we should light these outside, but I've got some water nearby just in case I have a fire issue. And there it is, our camping lantern. Again, do this outside. Do not light your lanterns inside. I have water nearby. I know what I'm doing. But there you go.